With the introduction of the web in the 1990s, things began to change around the world. For the first time in our history, people were in touch with each other in split seconds instead of minutes, hours, days, or even months. Using the theories of emergence, we can begin to understand what is evolving and how different systems are beginning to work together to create a whole new world that we are only beginning to be able to imagine. And here's the story of the harvester ants. So Deborah Gordon studied the harvester ants in the Arizona desert. And lots of scientists had studied ants before, but what they did is they went from colony to colony and made their observations. And instead of doing that, what Dr. Gordon did is she looked at specific colonies for their entire life cycle, which was about 15 years. So these colonies live a long, long time. With her work, she extended it, and we can relate this into our cities, how our brains work, our immune system, and of course the web. Now, each ant has a micro behavior, so each ant acts individually, and it changes the overall behavior of the colony. But the thing is there's no central brain or governing ant. The queen's only purpose is to lay eggs and to be fed and cared for by the workers. She doesn't decide what any worker ants do. The colony decides where to put the garbage and where to put the dead. And as Dr. Gordon looked at these ant colonies, she found out that mathematically the colonies put the garbage in the most efficient spot that's as far away from the colony itself, but still as efficient as they can to get it there, and the same place where they put their graveyards. Now, no individual ant defines these areas, but the colony knows how to calculate where these areas should go. There's no central planner to put these zones where they should go. And yet the colony puts the cemetery and the garbage place exactly at the point that's furthest from the colony. And the midden or the garbage area is as far as possible without putting it near the dead ants. So the question is, which ant is doing the geometry to determine this? There's another puzzle in here. There's no controlling ants. The colonies live for 15 years. Dr. Gordon noticed that the young colonies are very aggressive, and the old colonies are more stable and more protective of their territory. But it was very obvious, and she saw this on each of the colonies she studied, that the colonies learn and they remember. Now remember, there's no controlling ant, and each ant only has a lifespan of about 1 year. So how does this happen with the ant colony changing over the course of 15 years? Now the answer to this is in the science of emergence. Before I get into this theory of emergence, I want to tell you about another story. And that's about Manchester, England. You can see it here in the map. It's like right in the middle of the green aisle. And it was a small town until the Industrial Revolution. It was begun by the Romans in AD 76. It's about 150 miles north from London. Now, Manchester lay at the confluence of several world historical rivers. So they had steam-powered looms, they had a banking system of London, they had global markets and labor pool of Great Britain, all through 1700, 1850. And the city grew and grew. It grew faster than the authorities could keep up with it. In 1800, it had a 10 times increase over the space of 75 years. That's very, very quick growth. Charles Dickens wrote about the dreadful atrocities of Manchester in the working class area. A lot of his really creepy stories came about Manchester. And it was considered a manor, and it was run like a feudal estate. So there was like the feudal estate owner, and he just told everybody what to do. There was no government, there's no city planners, no police, and no public health officials. The city itself of Manchester wasn't incorporated until 1853. But here's the interesting thing. Ingalls wrote, someone can live in Manchester for years without coming in contact with a working class quarter or even with workers if one confines himself to his business affairs or strolling about for pleasures. And what happened as Manchester was developed is the slums in the working class areas were hidden away. But not by plan or design, because remember, there was no city planning, there was no government, no public health officials. But it would kind of developed with a conscious, explicit intention. The city hid its atrocities. It has been built less to a plan than any city in history. It is too huge and too complex a state of organized affairs ever to have been thought up in advance, to have pre-existed as an idea. So here's this complicated city that developed and grew very, very quickly from 76 AD to the 1800s. And yet if you went there for business, you would be around the business people and get a very good impression of the city, and all the slums and all the bad stuff that Dickens wrote about was well hidden away from you unless you really went and searched for it. Now compare that to the ant colony, where they knew where to put their garbage and they knew where to put their cemetery with nobody calculating anything. So this brings us to the theory of emergence. Now emergence is described as something that happens when the whole becomes smarter than the sum of its parts. So just like the ants were each doing their thing. By the way, ants communicate by exchanging hormones. They swap spit, and the enzymes tell the different ants what to do. So that's how they communicate, is by swapping enzymes. Same thing with Manchester. The people interacting and working together created something that was more than the sum of its parts. Emergence is something that happens when you have a system of relatively simple-minded component parts, and think about those ants, and often there's thousands or millions or billions of these simple-minded parts, and they react in relatively simple ways. Now I'm going to whisper in your ear, I'm going to say the web. Now, in emergence, out of all this interaction, some higher level structure or intelligence appears. Intelligence is an important word, and usually without any master planning calling the shots. And then these kind of systems tend to evolve from the ground up. So it isn't just one person like a civil engineer that says how Manchester was going to live or develop, or a super ant that knew how the colony was going to develop. It was all the pieces working together. This new thing emerged, this new intelligence. So here's another story. In 2000, Dr. Nagagaki announced that he had trained an amoeba-like organism called slime mold to find the shortest route through a maze. He set up 4 possible routes with food at 2 of the exits. Now, the interesting thing on this is slime mold is a close relative of the ordinary fungi. It has no central brain whatsoever, and yet it managed to navigate through the maze. When slime mold is in a really dry area, it'll break down into its individual parts, which are just little individual one-celled creatures with no brain, and they basically kind of just sit there and wait. They kind of go in stasis, and then when the conditions get right, these parts these one-celled organisms start joining together, and as it gets moister, then they make what we call slime mold. That's why slime mold seems to disappear out in the forest. The slime mold spends most of its time as thousands and thousands of distinct single-celled units, each moving separately from its comrades. But under the right conditions, it joins together and it becomes that blob that you see out in the woods. So the slime mold is basically switching back and forth between being an individual and being a swarm. Now, for years, scientists examined the slime mold and they were looking for a pacemaker cell, or they were looking for something that would trigger all these things to come together. And they came to the conclusion that all the cells are created equally. There's no central brain or chemical structure that triggers the other cells off. Now, this is a picture of a book called Emergence by Stephen Johnson. This is where I got most of these stories from. And he goes into the theory of emergence using really clear stories, a lot of computer stories, and makes it it's a lot of fun to read. So from Manchester, we learned about cities learning. Stephen Johnson talks about slashdot.org. And the interesting thing on Slashdot, which is very strong community of people making their opinions, is that as a member of Slashdot, you have the responsibility for a certain period of time to rate what everybody's writing. So as posts are put out on Slashdot site, you can rate the post between 1 and 5. 5 being very intelligent, very pertinent to the topic, and 1 being worthless. Usually there's some 2s and 3s in there being humorous. And what you can do with Slashdot is you can go out and you can set the setting to 5 when you're reading a topic, and all of a sudden everybody makes sense and is saying very pertinent and brilliant things. If you change the setting down to 1, which shows you what everybody posted, you'll get to see the range of human nature from inane comments and stupid comments to the very brilliant. But if you set it at 5, it's really amazing on how intelligent the conversation is and how it seems to all fit together. The Sims is also a really interesting piece on emergence, and when they created the Sims had made it too smart, and the characters did more stuff themselves. Now, people didn't like the game in that stage, so he had to dumb down all the characters because people like to play God. They like to be in control and make things happen. But it's possible to make the Sims really self-independent, and then all those little computer actions that happen in the Sims game basically become their own nature, and they're a really good symbol of what emergence can do. There's a program, it's a little older now, but it's called Star Logo, and it shows how you can set up with Star Logo. You can write simulations, so you can simulate how the slime mold collects and drops off. You can do a simulation how birds flock. Star Logo is real interesting, and Stephen Johnson talks about that in his book Emergence. Now, one of the things, and I brought this up with the ant colony as well as Manchester, is the idea with emergence that learning does not require consciousness. The ants weren't conscious of learning or changing their environment or their nature any more than the people in Manchester were conscious of where to put the slums and where to put the business areas. A real good example of this is our immune system. We learn, our immune system builds and grows throughout our lifetimes, and we literally build vocabularies of antibodies that evolve to fight invading microorganisms. So that you can think of our immune systems as learning, and we don't really have a consciousness of saying, do this, do that. It just through the process, the chemical reactions, our immune system learns. Now here's an important point. Learning is not just being aware of information, but storing it and knowing where to find it. Being able to recognize and respond to changing patterns. And then altering system behavior in response to those patterns. I'm going to repeat that once again because I want you to think of that in terms of the semantic web or the smart web, the web that is working in context. So learning is not just being aware of information, but storing it and knowing where to find it. The semantic web is going to take us beyond the straight word search that we do with Google, and instead it will give us a contextual search. And then being able to recognize changing patterns and then altering behavior. And that's where emergence comes in. Now, one of the things that's happening out on the web is the use of SOAP. And SOAP allows organizations to communicate with each other in a simple universal format. So I can communicate with Amazon.com or Google or just hundreds and hundreds of different companies by sending them an XML message, and then they send me an XML message back. This is easy for security purposes. It has greatly increased how different companies can work together. People don't have to rewrite and develop new software. They just have to tie in with a SOAP and send the message across the web, and then they get a response with the right answer. The web services is yet another story, another example of the emergence theory. And notice what's been happening, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, is the internet has become full of web services, with people being able to communicate globally on intranets, on closed networks. The web is changing and growing organically. So each owner of their own node decides their functionality and interface, but there's no master architect, not even Tim Berners-Lee, and it's an emerging system. It's a more intelligent, more efficient system that is coming out of it. Back in 1992, and I know that's pretty ancient history, but this is where CNN became a real known factor. But back in the 1990s, there was the the three major TV stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS. There was public broadcasting too. But in 1992, during a campaign, ABC asked Bill Clinton about some allegations that he had an affair with Jennifer Flowers, who was a cabaret singer, they call her. All three major TV networks, as well as CNN and PBS, McNeil-Lehrer report, they all kind of agreed with each other to run the story. Now back then, what was happening was these TV networks were in New York City. They were all in communication with each other, either by phone or somehow, probably not email in 1992. But they had in touch with each other, and they kind of agreed amongst themselves that they weren't going to run this story, that it was nobody's business except Bill Clinton's. So they kind of filtered what had happened. Well, along came Ted Turner, who started CNN. And what he did is to build CNN, he wooed all the local stations with full access to the CNN news feed as an alternative to ABC, CBS, and NBC. And that's the key there, is the communication. So he gave them full access into his news feed. So what the reporters and the photographers could do, the filmmakers, is they could get a story and feed it straight into CNN. They didn't have to go through the filtering process. This allowed the local stations to pick up what they wanted to run and not have to rely on the filtered information from New York City. So here's what happened. The local news in Atlanta decided to run the Jennifer Flowers story. So even though the major stations up in New York City decided that they wouldn't, Atlanta went ahead and did it. And this forced the hands of all the other networks. So the mechanism for determining what constituted a legitimate story had overnight been re-engineered, shifting from top-down system with little feedback to the journalistic neural network that we have today, where hundreds of affiliates participate directly to the creation of the story. So think of the web in the same way. Now this completely changed television history. It hasn't been the same since that, and CNN is now a major player. But still, that getting that news feeds from the local grassroots level is what changed everything. And the web is a developing emergent system. The question is, where will it take us in years ahead, and how can we or you make it more intelligent? because the web is going to reflect who we are as a human race. Now, more recently is the phenomena of Twitter. And Twitter is like short blog entries. I think it's, 128 characters? Not very long. But it's going into an age of people that were born with the web already existed. Everybody's used to the web. Everybody's used to instant information. And being the information age, it's the knowing equals being. So people want to know what all their friends are doing, what's going on. And it's even the thought that if you have 1 million subscribers following your tweets, you may have a saleable asset. When they say a penny for your thoughts, if you have 1 million people following you, that could become very valuable. And just like the bloggers are finding out that they can publish new texts, I think you're going to find the Twitterers are going to be able to do their work. The key here, though, is that they're finding out that Twitter is more than just saying what you had for breakfast or how much you had to drink at what bar. But Twitter is starting to become a communication tool that organizations are using, marketing people are using, and taken as a whole, it shows a whole different sense of communication between all of us and everybody. You're going to see examples such as Twitter happening all around the world. And Twitter is a global tool already, but you're going to see these communication links tying us together on a regular basis. Now, the normal person won't notice this, but you being in information technology will have an edge and know how to leverage this new phenomena, this emergence of the web. So a new global culture is developing as the world becomes more and more connected and information flows more smoothly. The semantic web that Tim Berners-Lee is working on is just a step towards this new emergence. It's all the other pieces all working together and multiplying out, and people being more aware of each other. And the bottom line is, will you be aware? You may be there, but will you be aware, and how will you leverage this information of emergence into the new world?